Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the foXnoMad podcast. I'm your host, foXnoMad Olopoat. My guest today is Angie Orth. She is a writer, content creator, and the author of the book Flirting with Disaster: True Travel Tales of Fear, Failure, and Faith. We talk about the trip that inspired the book, some of the disasters that Angie went through, some of her favorite travel moments, some of her best security tips that can help you if you're maybe thinking of taking a trip, especially solo. What are some things, some precautions you can take? We get into all of that. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode with Angie Orth. Hi, Angie. Thanks for joining the podcast. You are someone that I have known online or seen online for a long time. I think we're part of the sort of the original travel blogger group. Um, and then when I saw that you were writing a book, you had released a book, I was really curious to get in touch and learn more about, your travels, just sort of this collection of stories that you've put together. What has that process been like? What have you been up to recently?
Oh, well, yeah, I was thinking about that too. Like, you've been around as long as anybody, so you know what it's been like to start way back when, over 10 years ago, right?
Hmm.
And to see how everything has changed. So, I don't know. For me, it's just wild to look back because the book is set in 2011, which is the year that I quit my job and traveled around the world and had a blog, but like what was it? And it's pre podcast, pre Instagram, and pre all these things. So very different perspective on travel in the book than what it would have been if I'd written it, about a trip that I just took. And I'm glad because I feel like things have changed so much with how we travel and how we capture content when we travel and what our goals are when we travel. And really, that was probably my last big adventure before becoming a professional content creator. So, just a different outlook, a very different outlook.
Yeah, it seems like now when you travel, everyone is creating content for Instagram or what. Everyone has their phone out, everyone's recording and writing and photographing, which it wasn't like that, when we had started. You were kind of the weird person if you were doing those things.
Yes, it was absolutely shocking to people that I would quit my stable job and travel around the world and like write on my little cute blog, whatever. Like it was the most insane thing a person can do.
Yeah.
And now I mean, you can't go outside without bumping into somebody who's creating content and traveling and doing the cool quit your job kind of thing. So, yeah, it's really crazy to see how it's changed and I think, I don't remember what year it was. Maybe 2009, 2010 was the first ever like travel blogger get together.
Hmm.
And there were 50 people there. And now there's 50 million people that probably
Yeah.
consider themselves travel content creators of some sort. So yeah, it's very, very different. And because it changes so much, I feel like I have a new career every 18 months
Hmm.
because there's something being added, something being taken away, an algorithm changing in a way that affects my whole business. So yeah, it's just a wild adventure that I absolutely did not embark on purpose.
Yeah, at the time, what did you think? Like if you were gonna look into the future, I mean, it to me it seemed like, oh, this is definitely going to change, but I have no idea how, kind of thing.
Yes. Yes, that for sure. And so when I quit a PR job where I was working on all travel clients. So I was very deeply entrenched into the world of travel writers. And we were just figuring out what to do with travel bloggers. And I'm early on, like say 2008, we were like, who are these people? What do they want? Like we don't want to do anything with them. They're just freeloaders. And this is me as a person with a blog, but not never occurring to
Mhm.
me that it could be a job or something to monetize. So when I quit, it was really just like, I just want to be a travel writer. I want to be a freelance travel journalist. And so to kind of put those wheels in motion, I'll be blogging on my trip. That was a general idea. And I figured, I'll write for a year and then I'm going to come back and be serious. I'm turning 30 on this trip. I'm going to come back and I'm going to I got all the wanderlust out of my system. That was the plan. And then, blogging kind of took off and I was on the front of that wave. And I was like, I'm never going back to an office because maybe this could be something. And slowly but surely, it did become something that I could monetize and make a career out of, but it was never the plan. I didn't see it coming at all. I really didn't. I wish I had that kind of foresight, but I just needed a break from New York City and my corporate job and I just wanted to see the world and I never could string together enough vacation time to do that. And so it was like I have literally that was what I had to do was quit my job and travel for a year to be able to go anywhere.
And where are some of the places that you visited on that trip?
So I did 13 countries in the year and I started in Fiji and then went to New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Thailand, Laos, Greece, Turkey, Spain, England, Egypt, Kenya, South Africa. Yeah.
So wow, yeah, a pretty diverse set of countries, different geographies.
Yes.
Why those places?
I think a lot of it was I was trying to fit in so much bucket list because I had it in my head like this is your year and you're never going to have enough vacation time to really go anywhere ever again. So I was like, I got to see the pyramids. I got to go to Thailand. I have to do all these things because life is short and I just have to hurry. So I really wanted to fit in as much as I could. My initial goal was to do 6 continents. And if you read the book, you find out why I only ended up doing 5. Spoiler alert, it was a guy. And yeah, so I really wanted to hit the bucket list items. I wanted to go on a safari. I wanted to go shark cage diving and just hit the things that were in all my books when I was a kid and all the main sites that they told you to see. And being that this was pre social media, I wasn't traveling for it wasn't pre social media, but it was pre, you know,
Hmm.
excessive content about travel posed on social media. So I didn't have a lot of that as a guide, which was kind of nice because I ended up where I ended up and I took pictures of what I took pictures of. Looking back, I'm like, man, I could have so much killer content from Egypt and Kenya. And I just don't because I just took a few pictures that I wanted to take. I'm not standing there with elephants in the background. I'm just taking pictures, which is good. There was a freedom in that I wouldn't have now. So I appreciate it. But I also am like, gosh, I could have gotten so much better content. And oh, do I wish I had a GoPro?
Oh
I
yeah.
didn't have a GoPro. There's just so many. And I wish I had horizontal and vertical and whatever and more megapixels. I think anybody probably feels that way when they travel because it doesn't take long till technology outpaces the last photos you took and you're like, ugh,
Yeah.
bummer.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you look at black and white photos, you go, "Oh, that was like an ancient time." But now when you see like a video in like, 720p,
Yeah.
you're just like, "Wow,
Yeah.
that feels so old and long
Yes.
ago."
You're like, I can't even watch this. It's so bad. And you're like, I took that. That was in my lifetime. Oh,
Sometimes
yeah.
like I'll go to other travel bloggers and vloggers YouTube channels and I'll go to the oldest videos. And I love seeing those because they really are
Mhm.
like a time capsule. There's something
Yeah.
that's very genuine about those, that it's
Yeah.
not as produced, and
Agreed.
there's a
Agreed.
different motivation for making that video as to making it now.
So true. 100%. And I mean, that's me. That's all my channels. If you go back to my first Instagram posts, which took place on this trip because Instagram kind of came online while I was traveling, it's my feet at a pool with a hideous filter and a hideous frame and it's disgusting. It's a horrible thing, but it's like me at my office today, and it's just how I was feeling at the moment and it wasn't like something I had to think of or get the perfect shot or the perfect light. It was just my feet at the pool and nobody cared. Also, nobody was following. So it didn't really matter. But you're right. It was more, I want to say more authentic because what I do now isn't less authentic. It's just more thought of, really more produced. And I'm thinking about my audience. I'm thinking about my clients and all that does make for more produced content for sure.
Yeah, and I assume when you're writing a book, the book is Flirting with Disaster, that now you get this opportunity to sort of go back into those travel memories. But this is again sort of a produced version. And in other words, you get the luxury of being able to pick and choose the stories that you tell and how you want to tell them. How do you take so much travel and so much experience, and how do you put that into a book? Where does that process begin?
It took a long time. Truly, it was 13 years from the day I left on the trip to the day the book came out. So, a year of traveling and then lots of years of processing and taking a million notes. Just every time I thought of something that I thought could be interesting or a good angle or a story to tell, then I would write it in my notes app, which is just millions of words at this point. And then I got a literary agent. They pitched the book to publishers, then I got a book deal, and then I had a deadline. So then I was like, oh, I actually have to write it and do it. So um really the literary agent part, at that point you have to come to them with a pretty fleshed out view of what your book is going to look like when you're doing nonfiction, and then some sample chapters. So I worked on that forever and ever just to make it perfect. So you really know what you're going to write before you get the deal. And so then once I got the deal, it was just sort of executing it all the way through. And I think I had 120,000 words in my first draft, and I had to cut out 40,000. And they kind of were like, "Oh, cut even more." And I was like, "I can't, because I'm going to have to cut whole continents out. Otherwise, it's just not going to make sense. There's got to be some adjectives in this Joker, but it's pretty concise, because you just have to be so precious with your words because you don't have that many. And I don't know. I had it in my head that, like, oh, I can fit my whole life story in one book. I can't fit a whole year in one
Hmm.
book. And there's so much to see. And you're like, well, what do you leave on the cutting room floor? And all of those decisions are painful if you're a writer, because, I want to talk about the sights and the smells in Bali for like 10 pages, but you don't always have that luxury.
Hmm.
So you're choosing, like, what is the action? What is moving the plot along? What is getting us to the next place? What am I feeling? Like, there's so many things to take into account, to make it compelling, and not just, I went here, I did this, I saw this, I got on a ferry and I went to the next place. Like, that is not the book that I wanted to write. I've read a lot of that. I don't want to write that book. So I wanted there to be a plot and forward motion and people all along saying, what's going to happen next? And is there a little cliffhanger? I wanted it to be almost fiction, because, that's what it felt like. It was just this wild year of things happening that you had to be there to believe and had to see it. So, being able to tell that. But yeah, it was not easy. It was, nothing about it was easy. And that's me as a writer, a professional communicator, professional traveler, and just going back through all of it. I took a ton of notes. I had a blog as I was going. So all the this is what I did every day was captured in my blog. So I had really good notes for that. I had a journal for all the feelings parts, and my heart's broken and blah, blah, blah. Journal had all that. And then I went back to my pictures and used those to remember what everything was like when I was there. So I could really capture it and say, the colors, and be really honest about it. I wasn't just remembering it. I have the pictures of that exact moment that I was thinking of. So yeah, I wanted it to just kind of pop off the page for
Is
readers.
there is there a story that didn't make it, or an anecdote that you were like, I really wish I could get this in there, or
Hmm. There were a few pretty big things that ended up getting cut. Like, I actually came home 3 months in, and I just didn't put that in there at all. It was too
Mhm.
many words to and not really moving things along. So I just skipped it completely. But and that's the part where my sister would have been included. So
Mhm.
of course she's very irritated that her chapter is completely dropped from the book. But yeah, I don't think I cut anything big. The main sort of overarching thing that I had to cut was the good, easy times,
Mhm.
because those don't move the plot along as much. And I think I say this in the opening letter, that there were so many people who were good and kind to me and so helpful, but those are the ones that I kind of had to leave behind in a lot of cases. Just something as simple as somebody helping you carry your luggage up the stairs on the subway. And that's so kind, but you can't put every single thing in the book. So ultimately you have to pull back and leave mostly just the most dramatic things that happen, hence, the disasters. Um, but yeah, it's sad to have to leave out all the good people. I have a very long thank you section in the back. Very, very
Uh,
long.
Yeah, I guess it's just how sort of media works, right? Like the I wouldn't say maybe negative, but the more
Mhm.
sensationalized
Yeah.
things are sort of what people gravitate toward.
Well, that's for sure. And if you don't want to write the same book that somebody else has already written, you really have to hone in on those things that only you saw or only you experienced. So, yeah, I could write 25 pages on how lovely it was to go to Laos. But ultimately, that's kind of already been written. That's easy enough to find somewhere else. I have to write about what happened to me
Hmm.
in Laos and give enough sprinkling details about the country and the culture to interest people to learn more on their own. That's, it's definitely not comprehensive about any of the countries. There's enough to get you excited and to give you a setting to know what's going on, but it's no guidebook, that's for sure.
So, what are some examples of disasters that you came across, and now having, the travel experience to look back, are there things that, you look back and you go, oh, I see that in a different light, or I could have done something a little bit differently in that situation?
Mm. Well, so the disasters. Let me take you back to 2011, which was somehow the most ridiculous year to date in history for natural disasters. There was the Japanese tsunami. That was that year. There were lots and lots of earthquakes, including in Christchurch, which pretty much decimated the city, collapsed buildings, changed the landscape forever. There was an enormous cyclone in Australia, and all of these things are happening like as I'm there or just leaving, or I was in Bali when the Japanese tsunami happened, and my mom's like, run for higher ground. And I was like, okay, it's not really there, but I see what you're saying, and we all think back to the Boxing Day tsunami and how many countries were, so all those kind of things. Then we also had, as I'm heading to Egypt, we've got the Arab Spring. So it's like, do you go? Do you not go? Then there's austerity protests in Greece, and just everywhere I went. I thought London was going to be just easy peasy and no big deal. Riots. People are setting double-decker buses on fire. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And I'm like, I thought this was going to be the one place that I could just like sip some tea and have some cakes and just chill out. And even there, it was nuts. When I landed in Kenya, the State Department issued a warning that grenade attacks were about to be happening in tourist locations from Al Shabaab. I'm like, what is going on here? So that was basically the whole year. It was just dodging this, that, and the other thing after I swore to my family, who was horrified that I was quitting my stable job and going to travel by myself. Yeah, they were right. It was dangerous. Like the world kind of did fall apart that whole year. And um so yeah, basically we just go from country to
Hmm.
country and experience what those people were experiencing in their real lives, and I was just there as a visitor. So, yeah. And what was the second part of the question?
So, looking back at that, I mean, are there things that you say like, I could have done something differently, or maybe look at the disaster in a different light? In other words, maybe it was a bigger deal than I made at the time. It's like,
Mm.
okay, this was a worse situation than I realized, or maybe it wasn't such a big deal.
I think that's probably the case. I think I downplayed a lot of it, just because I didn't want everybody back home to be freaking out. Also, I was pretty naive and pretty stubborn about everything. I'm like, yes, I'm going to Egypt, deal with it, it'll be fine. And it was not fine. I mean, I ended up okay, but people literally died while I was there in massacre. So it actually wasn't fine. And so what I do look back on it now, it is with gratitude. that I was able to kind of be a part of world events and see things and get perspective and just see a lot of stuff in real time and see how wars and protests and stuff affect local economies and affect just local business owners and people that work in tourism because I work in tourism. And so I'm like, I see you, I get it. I understand why, why the hawkers in Egypt are so aggressive because they hadn't had any business in 6 months at that point. And this is all pre-pandemic. So then the pandemic rolls around and I'm like, I know what happens in these
Hmm.
tourist destinations and how just unbelievably difficult it is to bounce back when you work in tourism. I think 25% of jobs in the world are tourism related. So anytime there's a disaster or some kind of destruction or war, it affects so many people in tourism. So yeah, it definitely gave me a lot of perspective on that. And yeah, I think the one thing I would do differently is have better insurance, like medical evacuation, all that. I would just be more prepared for that because I literally got by the skin of my teeth on a lot of these things, and it would have been all too easy for me to be stranded or injured or kidnapped or whatever.
Hmm.
There was just so many situations. And yeah, I definitely, with all these years of perspective, I'm much more cautious. And you'd think I would be more carefree because I like lived through it. But now I'm like, oh, I was such a naive little traveling girl. I just feel gratitude that I got through it all.
Yeah, and when you're writing and talking about safety, there is sort of I always find people will write and say, "Oh, this place is safe because
Oh,
nothing happened to me."
yeah,
But
that's not.
yeah, right. It's not how it
No,
works, right? So yeah.
no. I mean, no place is safe. Safe is such
Hmm.
a relative concept because I could walk outside my house and get mugged here in my neighborhood, and that can happen anywhere you go. And planes are safe until they're not,
Hmm.
until the doors fall off. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like all this Boeing stuff, we all kind of walk around in this bubble where we maybe feel safe, but I think a lot of that is just in our heads because life is out there lifing and the world is doing its thing and you just never know. You just never know. And that's what I always said to my parents and my grandparents when they were freaking out. I'm like, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go, which is so true, but you could still be prepared. If it's not your time to go, it would be nice if you have medical evacuation or, terrorism response evacuation to get you the heck out of somewhere. It's not like death or life. There are other in between things. And so one incident I had, that's a good example. When I was in Kenya, I was on a bush plane and the pilot was trying to take off in this torrential downpour. And I'm like, we're going to die. We're definitely going to die. We couldn't take off. We kept slamming back on the ground and slamming back on. I'm like, why are you trying? Just wait for the rain to pass. Anyway, we ended up spinning out into the savannah in the Masai Mara in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, we're about to flip. The wings are going to fall off. Like I'm having all of these flashes in my mind. Fortunately, we didn't, but it was very close. And my thought was, who is going to come get me? Who do I call even if I survive this? Because I'm not worried about dying. I'm worried about surviving and being out there with lions and hyenas and a burning plane and no way to call anybody. So it's nice to be prepared. And
Hmm.
I would say that if you're traveling at all, if you're going anywhere, just get the travel insurance. I'm literally sending a link to my sister today because we're going to Sweden next week. And I'm like, we're just gonna get it. It gives you peace of mind.
Hmm.
If something goes wrong, you get robbed, you get pickpocketed, you've got some peace of mind. You got a little bit of backup. So that's the one probably main thing that's changed about me since then.
And are there any sort of security tips that you find like, okay, as aside from the being prepared, is there something that you do on a regular, every trip kind of thing, or?
There's so many things I do that are just habit now, down to when I check in at a hotel, I'm very cognizant of if they're saying my room number out loud
Mhm.
and who's around and always looking around, always being aware. Because there have been way too many times that I've been the gullible, like, oh, you need a ride? Oh, hop in with me. And oh my gosh, it's a scammer.
Hmm.
Like I have been scammed so many times for a professional traveler because I'm just like nice. And I think everybody's nice and everyone is not that nice. Even if somebody's just trying to scam you out of like $10, that's still not very nice.
Yeah.
I can always chalk it up to like, well, I guess they needed it more than I did. But then, so you have to be so aware of every person you meet. And it's always tricky when you're traveling alone because you do want to make connections and you want to make
Hmm.
friends and you just don't know. And you don't have enough time with most of these like transitory relationships to ascertain if someone's character is legit or not. You
Hmm.
don't know. You meet some people in the hostel for breakfast in the morning and somebody wants to go hiking. You don't have time to run a background check. There's a
Yeah.
lot of trust that goes into that. And of course now you could probably stalk them on social pretty quickly and get a general idea, which I totally would do if I was in that situation. Um yeah, but I don't know. Times have changed. Times
Yeah.
have really changed.
It's funny that you mentioned Egypt and a few other places. We may have overlapped. I mean, I was in Egypt right around the Arab Spring and a few other places. Um, and so, when I go to a place, I'm usually hyper aware, at least the first few days, because like
Yeah.
you don't know. Like, are
Yeah.
people being nice? Is this the character of
Yes.
the culture and that person? You don't know. Um, but I always wonder, and you write about in the book, traveling as a solo female traveler. It's a question I get a lot, which I can't really answer. I don't know how it would be different. But is that something that adds more layers of sort of like fear, or what is how do you navigate that?
I have no experience as a guy, but I am married to one. And his perspective is always so interesting to me because he's never been afraid of anything a day in his life. He's been 6'4" since he's been like 11 years old. Like everyone's afraid of him. He's not afraid of anybody. And I'm 5'3" and blonde and Southern. And so people just look at us differently and assess us very differently. And even down to I don't go to the store after dark in my own town, which is probably perfectly safe, but that's just a choice that I have made for myself. I'm not going to the store by myself after dark. And I explained that to him and he's like, "Why?" I was like, "Because there's people. You just never know. Somebody could throw you in a trunk." He's never once had to think if he was going to get thrown in a trunk. Meanwhile, every time I get out of my car to walk into a store or come out, I'm looking who's around. Where's the closest light? Is there a camera? Do I have my keys in my hands so I can like Wolverine somebody? I have to look under the car before getting in it, look in the back seat. Like he has never ever thought of those things a day in his life. So just based on our experience as a man and a woman, I think there probably are some pretty significant differences. And it's not different for me when I'm traveling because, like I said, I have to be hyper aware everywhere I go. So I don't think it's super different when I travel. It's just the reality of the way I was raised, and maybe there are some women who weren't raised with, the fear of leaving home, but my book is very clear that I was raised on a diet of the world is a scary place and yet strangers are scary and you know that whole thing. And so it definitely informs your worldview, which I can see why my parents were a bit stressed when I was like, I'm going to Egypt during the craziest time and the government overthrow. And yeah, it's probably fine. And I didn't travel solo on that trip. That was a change I made kind of midway through. I decided to join a group trip.
Hmm.
And because that added me an extra layer of safety and extra people around and a guide who knew what they were doing, I knew that that would save me from having to go up to strangers whose character I did not know and ask questions and end up who knows where. You've probably been to Thailand and
Hmm.
they will tell you yes when the answer is definitely not yes.
Yeah.
So, and it's kindness. They just want you to be happy. But I'm like, it would have been better if you didn't send me to the wrong bus station.
Yeah.
I would have preferred the correct information and I wouldn't have been mad about it. But they just want to help so much that they'll just give you any information. So landing in Egypt, is it going to be like that? Are they going to send you to the wrong place? You don't have the luxury in a place that's kind of going through upheaval to go to the wrong place. You do not have that luxury. Things have to be done right. So that was a time when I just chose safety instead of, my ornery sternness.
Well, no, you bring up some good points. There are things that you mentioned which I have never thought about myself. And I realize now, as paranoid as I can be, those first day, getting into the first cab, there's always I've had, bad incidents in cabs where I've been just driven to a
Mhm.
part of the city and robbed. Like that's happened to me.
Yes.
And
Ugh.
so like you're just like, that but it's changed now, you have Uber or whatever. It's a little bit easier with those things.
Yeah.
But I think you mentioned things which are a different level of like I'm more worried like, oh, I get robbed kind of, you know what I mean? And I'm
Yes.
just like, all right,
Yes.
I'll figure it out from there. But there's a more sort of bodily harm.
Yes,
Like,
there's a lot more concern with assault and kidnapping and all those kind of things. Like I don't want to be robbed either, but like you
mhm,
said, you figure it out. I got pickpocketed in Athens. I don't think I was there 20 minutes and my
mhm,
wallet was gone. So learned my lesson very quickly, but at the end of the day, it was fine.
mhm,
That I
mhm,
had to get things replaced and I lost some money, but at the end of the day, it's fine. It's the other things that are far more concerning. And uh, back then I would wear a ring
mhm,
and always say, "Oh yeah, my husband's meeting me." Or you get on the phone and, "Oh, hey honey, oh, I'll see you in 5 minutes." And I still do that. If you get any kind of weird vibe, and if nothing else, that year of traveling by myself, I learned to trust my intuition about people. And I don't know if it's my southern upbringing, but we're just more polite than smart. Like I would rather die than somebody think I'm impolite. But that got me into trouble way too many times when I should have said, absolutely not. Like, go away from me. You're annoying. Stop
mhm,
talking to me. Instead, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And you entertain the conversation. And then people in some countries, people think you entertaining a conversation is you expressing a certain level of romantic interest in them.
mhm.
I didn't know that. So everybody just thinks I'm out there flirting and I'm just trying to be polite. So many things that you learn, especially going to so many countries in just a year. It's just culture, 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 and
Yeah.
figuring out the people and what is well meant and what is actually dangerous.
Mhm.
It's so much to think about, so much to process.
Yeah, it's experience on sort of fast forward where you just have to learn so much in such a short period of time.
Yeah, it's like drinking from a fire hose. That's
Mhm.
how I tend to think about it. So I feel like the book kind of has that pace too. It's a very quick, speedy read. You just like feel like you run around the world, and that's what it felt like to me too, even though it was a whole year.
And are there any stories or anecdotes where you go, what I guess after you wrote the book, do you look back and say, the world is worse than I thought it was, and I was lucky to have this adventure, or maybe it's better than I thought it was? Did you land anywhere on that side?
I think I probably landed on both, which is weird and kind of a cop out answer, but some folks are so much worse
Mhm,
than I ever imagined. And the level of scam, there's just so many scams and there's so many people trying to separate you from your money, which at the end of the day, fine. Like that's not such a big deal. It's the other ones, like you said, the assault and the bodily harm. And those are the ones that really would keep you awake at night. But then there were so many great people. People who were just like, you're traveling alone? Join our party. Come ride with us. Oh, we'll hang out for the day just so you don't have to be lonely. Let me help you with your stuff. So many people like that. And I mean, the kindness of other people blew me away in the same way as the scamminess of other people and sort of the creepiness of some guys. It just I don't know. It probably just highlighted a lot of what I learned living in New York for 5 years. It just made it bigger on a bigger scale and taught me about trust and maybe not being super trusting. I think previously I was like, everybody's so nice and this is such a great adventure and everyone is just here to make friends with me. Okay. Like I know better now and I've learned that, but it does really help you be a better judge of character. And like I said, to listen to that intuition when something feels off. So
Hmm.
I just ignored that for so long because I was so hell bent on having an adventure that yeah, I ignored so many red flags, and that did lead to a lot of disasters. Fortunately, nothing super serious for me, but you know, I think probably hundreds of thousands of people died in this year in a lot of the places I went due to either natural disasters or war. Um, and for some reason, I shot out on the other side, and I don't know how and I don't know why, but it just gives me this perspective like there's a reason, we all have a purpose and we all end up where we end up for some reason. So just the general idea of making other people's lives better,
Hmm.
not just taking, not just being an experiencer of life, but also bringing kindness and goodness and being a good ambassador of my country. I know you go to places and they're like, ugh, American, gross. And, I've always taken it very personally that I want to be a good ambassador for my country, even though I'm not an official ambassador. I always wanted to be one, but instead I'll just be the unofficial traveling kind.
And if you were going to give your book to past you
Mm,
and say, here's what's going to happen, what would
mm,
you want you to take out of that?
oof. Uh, yeah, there would probably be so much less relationship stuff in the book if I went and did it over again because I would be more aware of red flags and I wouldn't be so caught up in the idea of having a romance and meeting somebody on the road. Like there was just this romantic excitement about the whole thing because, eat, pray, love, right? That's what you do. You go out in the world, you meet some kind of handsome Brazilian, and then happy ever after. And all the guys I met were not like that. And I really projected those ideas onto them, and they projected, you're an American. You're just like the girls from Love Actually. Have
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
seen Love Actually at
Yeah.
the very end with the English guy, and then he meets all the hot girls from Wisconsin? That's what they were projecting onto me. So everybody was confused and nobody had the right idea of what was going on. So, yeah, I think me now looking back at that, I probably would just have very different ideas on relationships. I'd still do the trip, for sure. And even though I look back now and I'm like, how did I do that? I don't know if I would do that now. It seems so insane. It was insane when I did it. And now I look back and I'm like, girl, I'm really glad I did it in my 20s. That's all I can say. Because I don't know. I don't know if I'd have the energy to do it now.
And to somebody who wants to pick up the book and read it, what do you hope they take away from it? Maybe they're thinking of traveling, or they've traveled a little bit. What do you want sort of the message of the book to be?
Probably just that it's worth it. It's worth it to take a risk in your life. Um, Not everybody's going to do a year of travel, and it doesn't have to be that for it to be valuable. I think a week of solo travel can be life changing. And I think take the vacation time. And if you can't, then quit your job. And, you know, the money will come. That's why I always say it drives my mom crazy, like absolutely crazy. Cause I'm like, the money will come, you'll get more money. And she's like, no, save your money. Like there was this big idea that I was wasting my life savings. It was like 25 grand that I had saved up for this trip. And I'm wasting it and I'll never get it back and I'll never get a job again. And none of that was true. And especially now, all these years later, nobody has a real job. Nobody wants to work in an office. I mean, I say that lightly, but there's so much more flexibility to work. There's so many more remote jobs. So, it's so much easier than it used to be. It's easier to stay connected. Like there's fewer barriers than there were back then. So if you want to do it, like you can do it. All the opportunity is there. You just kind of have to decide where you want to go and figure out how to finance it and off you go, you know?
I,
So
I
worth it.
Yeah, I love that message. I think I don't think I've spoken with someone who's traveled who said, I regret taking the trip. Like,
No,
um,
no,
it
no. As
always,
many
yeah.
bad things that happened. I mean, as many disasters and heartbreaks and money wasted and all that is still worth it. It was still, the lessons of a lifetime. And you're gonna have bad days no matter where you are.
Hmm.
So you might as well do it on a beach in Thailand and then, get some work done in the afternoon and you might as well, it's better than an office. And if I learned anything, it's that I'm not going back to an office.
And I mean, I guess if you're looking back, would you have wanted a perfect trip where everything went great and there were no disasters, or do you like the version that turned out to be?
You know, uh, I mean, it probably would have been better, but there would be no book
Hmm.
because there's no story without tests and trials. And I always wanted to write a book. So in the end, and the trip ends up paying for itself when, you write a book and it all just works out and the money comes back. And it opened so many doors for me. Going through all those things and look, I'm doing it still all these years later, and it's because I took that risk, literally stepping out onto a path I couldn't even see yet.
Hmm.
It didn't exist. And just doing that changed the trajectory of my life from publicist, which was a great job that I loved, but it was killing me, to a job that I actually do wake up every day and I'm excited to make content and I'm excited to travel and help other people travel. Um, so yeah, I wouldn't change anything, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one last question I like to ask people who have traveled extensively is there a moment or a place where you said to yourself, and probably there's multiple, but one that sticks out that you said, you know, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe this is my life. Or
Mm,
I saw this in a magazine and
mm.
now I'm here. That kind of moment.
Yes. So many. There's so many. And when they hit you, they're so overwhelming.
Hmm.
Um, One that is popping in my head right now. Egypt was such an incredible trip. It was 2 weeks, and I feel like I didn't sleep the whole time. It was just I was up for every sunrise because we were in a hot air balloon over the Valley of the Kings. Like, okay, I'm not going to miss that because I'm tired. And then we hiked overnight up Mount Sinai in order to see the sunrise. And I was like, this is so stupid. I hate hiking. I would never do this, but I'm so glad I did it, and it was spectacular. Um, so yeah, anything in Egypt was really a moment like that for me, and also being in such an ancient place
Hmm.
and just kind of the layers of history, and all layers of history always get me in my feels. And because I'm like, there so many people walked here and the ancient people, and then I'm thinking of every layer and I'm thinking of the Bible, and I'm just, I'm literally like, it overwhelms me just to think. And now me, just little old me from Florida, is here enjoying buildings that somebody so long ago thought up and dreamed up and suffered for and paid for, and whatever the case is, that stuff just gets me. It just
Hmm.
overwhelms me so much. And then anytime I see animals in the wild, that gets me too. I'm just like, I can't believe I got to see a cheetah. I saw a cheetah or a rhino, anything that's rare. I'm just overwhelmed by, the creator and the brilliance in all of that. So it definitely gets me in sort of my like religious feels
Hmm.
big time. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing those moments are, I think, kind of what makes traveling so amazing is,
Yeah.
like you said, I mean, you're like, I'm walking in a place that people have walked for thousands of years. And in thousands of years from now, who knows who will be walking here? I always think that, like, we can't even
Yes.
imagine what I mean, when they built the pyramids, they had no idea. You'd be there, hot air balloons, your phone, like, it's so different.
No, they couldn't have imagined what that would be for their descendants. And
Hmm.
oh, then you get into thinking like, these people don't like these people, and they're all still here, and they've been here for thousands of years, and can't we all just get along? And then it's just wild. There's so much to ponder. And I mean, I'm thinking about the time I went to Jerusalem and just walking around, it does your head right in. It's
Hmm.
just so much, so powerful, so intense. Um, yeah, and I mean, you can have those experiences everywhere. because the world is just such a big, crazy, amazing place. And the fact that we can get caught up in our little bubbles that are often very insignificant.
Mhm.
You think small town girl, we're talking PTA and stuff like that. Like, and that's the biggest thing in the world. And then you go travel and you just get a different perspective on what everybody else out there is facing and what everybody's up to and what it's like to survive a tsunami or an earthquake destroying your town. And whew, it just the perspective is worth every dollar I lost and every time my heart was broken. Like it was just all worth it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your stories. I hope people pick up the book, Flirting with Disaster: True Travel Tales of Fear, Failure, and Faith. Um, I, I I think people will learn a lot. I think it sounds like an adventure that some people will be like, I'll do that, or that's not for me, but I'll read about somebody else going through all
Yes.
those
Oh yeah,
disasters.
there's a lot of that. My mom's like, I'm not going anywhere. That sounds terribly dangerous. So, to
Yeah.
each his own, but it's definitely, even if you're just reading it on the beach
Mhm.
for the summer, it's a good escape
And people can find the book on everywhere they get books,
everywhere
Amazon,
they get
Barnes and
books.
Noble.
Yep,
Perfect.
it's available now and there's just a few copies left. Just kidding. There's plenty of copies left.
I'll leave
Just
links to the
just
book in
get
the
one.
show notes
Yeah.
where people can pick one up. And where else can people find you?
So my blog is angieaway.com and I'm the same on all the platforms, TikTok, Instagram, any new platforms, I'll be there at Angie Away, which is AWAY.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll link to those all in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time, Angie. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I love hearing the stories and just the adventures and the craziness. I think, like I said, it's just something. It's almost like a war story, that travelers have. It's like
Yes.
so
And we all have them. And I hope that it encourages people to see the reality of traveling around the world, but to still want to do it.
fantastic. Well, that's a great message to leave off on. I hope everybody takes that to heart. Thank you again, and everyone listening. Talk to you in the next episode. Thank you, Angie, for being a guest on the podcast, and thank all of you for listening. I will leave links to everywhere you can find the book Flirting with Disaster in the show notes. I hope you check it out wherever you get your books. I hope also, if you're listening to the podcast, the audio version, leaving 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts really helps us get the word out. Thank you very much for all of your support, especially this season. It is our biggest season yet. So thank all of you for supporting and subscribing and for leaving your kind reviews. And until the next episode, I hope you have a great rest of your day.